You're busy, you've got a decent practice, but nobody wants to be decent. You want to be great, and you want to have a great practice. So how did the most productive, profitable dentist in the nation balance real life, work, and profits, and somehow make it all seem fun? Well, it comes down to simple, everyday practices. So grab a lunch, join us as we chat with top clinicians and influencers to discover their formula for uncommon success. Are you ready? Then it's time to explore everyday practices with Vicki McManus-Peterson and Dr. Chad Johnson.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Everyday Practices. Today we have part 2 of my conversation with Chris Moriarity from Productive Dentist Academy about using data within your practice to drive your decisions. So let's jump right into our discussion about case acceptance and how patients think.
And one of the things that usually blows people's minds is, again, the way that our brain kind of tracks our experience is wildly unpredictable. So when you ask somebody to tell you a few stories, it's amazing the first stories that come to mind that they then apply to the rest of their practice. Well, this happened with this patient. That means all my patients are like this. And that is really, really common. And so when you get in there, one of the questions I like to ask, and this is something that I can tell you as somebody who's looked at the marketing for a lot of practices, the first 3 practices I looked at, I said, I must be doing something wrong. I must be running the models wrong. Anecdotally, this doesn't feel true to me. And I doubled down. I went back to the smartest people I know, and they all confirmed it. But here's basically what it was. So the fundamental question was, as we're marketing to patients, everyone kind of targets a similar demographic, right? Everyone's kind of going for kind of 55 and up, women, cosmetics, and so on and so forth, right? So what I wanted to know is, well, what is the relationship, number one, just simply between age and treatment plan? That's it. Meaning you would think anecdotally that as people get older, the treatment plans would increase. So it would make sense for us to spend time and money trying to attract people on the upper end of that scale. And the very first practice I looked at, there was no correlation at all. I mean, almost as close to zero as you could get. I mean, statistically irrelevant, right? But I'm like, this was a newer practice. So I said, okay, well, he's probably not doing a lot of target marketing, which would make sense that everything's kind of flat. So I did one more, and it was still just like maybe a 1% correlation. So then I jumped down to an office down in Texas who does a ton of marketing in a lot of different areas, does a tremendous amount of implants and whatnot. I said, okay, well, this for sure, we're going to see a correlation. No, we didn't. And what we found was these treatment plan levels, basically between the ages of, it was like 22 or 23 and up, it was all the same. I mean, it wasn't the same, but it was, meaning you saw those same levels and the same thresholds and the same top end
bell curve
across the board. So all of a sudden, like, it was a real light bulb moment, because one of the things I always talk about, since you brought up the bell curve, is when you look at where everybody's going, it's the most crowded, it's the most expensive. It makes more sense to shoot for the edges where nobody is. So how many dentists do you know that are marketing for pretty intense or high level treatment to people in their 20s and 30s?
Right.
I couldn't think of any. But the data across, now I think I've looked at 13 or 14 practices, and now it's at the point where they're all the same. They're all the same. And to where I'm like, there's a huge opportunity for somebody to come in and start targeting that market, because there's nobody standing there. Like, there's nobody even trying, because we didn't believe, and again, this was us just relying on our guts, saying, well, it makes sense that older people would have more needs, but it's not true. It is not true. So again, huge light bulb moment for me, and went back in and said, man, oh man. And and that's one of the things too, with the data, take your ego out of it. Because I stood right there and I said, I was wrong. I firmly believed that. I thought it was a foregone conclusion, and I was wrong. But
I'll tell you what, Chris, hold on a second. If you're a listener listening right now to this, I think it'd be interesting to let you know we have a Facebook page that we post the podcasts. The Everyday Practices podcast is part of Productive Dentist Academy. And so if you look up Productive Dentist Academy on Facebook, you'll find this, and that might be a lively discussion. I mean, who am I to say, but that could turn out to be interesting. So why don't you go there? If you find that information interesting and you'd like to make a comment about it or ask questions, Chris would certainly respond. I'm speaking for him, but he'd love to talk about this kind of stuff, because this is what he's engaged in all day long.
Well, and anybody too that, I mean, for a real quick answer, If you've got dental intel or something similar to it now, this is something that we can find out in under 10 minutes. I mean, we can get in there and build the graphs, and you'll just see it. I mean, it's right in front of you, and there's no questioning it, because you can see, plotted out all those treatment plans and all those ages, and there's a big flat line that sits on top. A few outliers here and there, but by and large, it really changes your perspective.
There's also, two clinical. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just going to say, when we're looking at, and I'm guilty of this, I call them VIPs, folks who are coming in the morning who fit that profile of sort of that ideal situation. I had to change the definition of that, because it just wasn't true. I was looking at making sure we're investing the most amount of time and energy into the folks who are in the most need. How about that?
You were looking at 80/20.
I had to broaden that definition, and rightly so.
Two clinical pearls that I was thinking of is, number one, whenever I present something to a patient, and rather than saying, for example, how did you say it? How do you want to start? Which I don't think actually saying, how would you like to proceed? But that's different than what do you want to do? One of the things that I like asking the patient is, this crack is asymptomatic. I'd like for you to consider getting it done proactively before it becomes painful. Your other option is you could wait until it becomes a problem. And there's two kinds of people. There's certain people that want to be proactive, and there's certain people that want to be reactive. And it has to do with your risk tolerance. And so I explain to patients, that some people they're just like, well, so what if it cracks? So I'd have to have it pulled, right? And I say, yeah. And they go, so what then? And I go, well, you'd either have a tooth not there, or you'd get an implant or something. They go, so what? So I'll just do it then. Okay, well, you've made up your mind for what's your best course of action. But they're more of the reactive style. And listen, I'm still going to end up possibly doing an implant on them. So it's not as though they won't have treatment. But the other option is the person says, ooh, that sounds horrible. I think I want to be proactive. And they say, why don't we do an onlay on that tooth? Now they've bought into, through their own risk tolerance, what their model is for how they want to go about doing it. And now I'm serving them. Interestingly, the second pearl that I want to give is, so the first one being proactive versus reactive. I love using those words. And then also talking about risk tolerance for patients. What's your risk tolerance? Do you care that your tooth cracks? Some people go, oh no, let's fix it right now. Other people say, I don't care. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that when the other pearl that I have is when someone says, well, I'm kind of on the fence. And I say, well, I'll tell you what, these crowns are expensive. And I mean, if it was a $2 crown, you'd probably say yes, right? And Chris, you'd probably find that psychology right there really interesting, because what I'm saying is, cost aside, you need to do this. And it's interesting how you can basically kind of bring someone back because I'll say, listen, if this orthodontics was $5, you'd surely do it. Right? And they'd say, oh, yeah. And so now we're in agreement that we're still trying to get the same outcome. It just has to do with cost. And so that's where then we can say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we, have my financial advisor look that over with you for cost estimate and financial arrangements and stuff like that. Or you might just say, 5 years from now, it might be better for me to do. And some people kind of nod their heads and say, yeah, now is just not a good time. That's fine. And then you can almost play coy and just say, that's fine. We'll wait with you. That's one of those Paul Homily comments is, we'll wait with you. And but it works really well. Proactive, reactive, and then just saying, if this implant was $40 rather than $4,000, you'd do it, right? And they go, well, yeah. And so it is about cost. I mean, dentistry is expensive. I get that. So why don't we have that?
That's life.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally love it. One of the things you can add to the proactive, reactive, which I love, is what's really unique is you can assign positive attributions to people that they will naturally absorb. Here's what I mean by that is if I sat next to you and I just said, Chad, we both know you're trustworthy. And then I could continue to go on with something in terms of where I'm going to trust you. So I've set you up to where, what are you going to say? No, I'm not. And even if you were a thief, you're not going to come back on that. So there's a technique that I refer to as time traveling. And if I was having that cracked tooth conversation, I can say we can be proactive or reactive, but something tells me you're a lot like me, and the thought of waking up in the middle of the night with my tooth cracked in half scares me to death, right? And so all of a sudden I'm time traveling, and I put them in this various scenario, but I'm saying they're a lot like me. That would scare me to death. And because what am I really doing? I'm saying you're that type of person who avoids those situations. So even if they are somebody who has a high risk tolerance, because that would define me. Because I years ago when I was, the way that my teeth come together down at night, I was just bashing these two teeth together over time, and it was looking at a crown versus a large filling. And I was like, well, what's the difference? And he goes, well, we could do a large filling and just wait for it to crack, or we can do this. And I said, well, what's the likelihood that it'll crack? And I'd probably, and he put a time on it. Yeah, it'd probably in a few
5% a year.
And I was like, So in my mind, I was like, well, me in the future
self. You talk about that future self.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Our future self's loaded. So he'll be ready for that then when that happens. My today self is pinching pennies. And so it's a really clever technique to just say, you're probably a lot like me, where the thought of this thing happening scares me to death. So more than likely we're going to want to do X, Y, Z.
I like that.
And you paint them in that picture because they don't want to back you down and say, no, I'm not. Because you just psychologically won't. That's why when you look at horoscopes, it's interesting, and it's something that we've all played with over time. They put them in the newspaper, and you read your horoscope. Well, I mean, I hate to break it to people, but it's not magic. When you're commonly assigning even an arbitrary list of positive attributions to people, they'll naturally look for those things in themselves. They'll say, oh, you were born here? That means that you're trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Oh my God, I totally am.
Chris, you probably got a chuckle out of a couple years ago when they said, oh no, there's a 13th horoscope thing. And and all of a sudden it was like, wait a second, what? There's 13, there's 13, where you call those things, Geminis and all that stuff. There was 12, and then all of a sudden they're like, we found that there's a 13th one. It's like, shoot, I thought I was awesome and good looking, but now I've got to go with the new category, and they're all arbitrarily assigned. Hey, something else.
And strong.
Yeah, who knew I wasn't? So, what I want to take home, on wrapping up our conversation, because you've been generous with your time and I really appreciate it, but with Productive Dentist Academy, you also help people with marketing, even though you're not necessarily involved with the day-to-day, but you do help people look at the bigger picture with that kind of stuff. That I used to be proud, and a lot of listeners are the same way. I used to be proud of having a $0 marketing budget, aside from when I'd want to give $200 to the local high school for this or that, or, but for all the purposes, that's $0. And then when we started figuring out, okay, how do we make, 5 or 8% of our budget to go to marketing? And that was a tough move. And I'll tell you why. Bringing it back to the fact that, maybe the title of this podcast should be Data is Power, because I didn't want to throw money to the marketing gods only to find that, I'd get a good return one month or not a good return on one newspaper article or something like that. And I just thought, I'd rather keep the money and I'd rather pocket it. It just makes no sense for me to put my faith in the marketing gods. So I'm just going to keep that money because it's just ridiculous. And then you start telling yourself, well, I'm going to do word of mouth and it's going to be awesome because I don't market. And so everything that I've built is on my own. But the change at heart that I saw was that you guys use the data and that you also are proactive in branding how the person perceives you, because everything that you do, even down to how you walk into that high school basketball game that you're going to support, it says something about you. And so branding is just being anticipatory in how your message is being brought across of who you are. And so when we started our 5% with Jenny Ballman, she was very judicious and smart about how we marketed. And then we started seeing a return on investment, and it was consistent. And this last month was spectacular, mind you, the December 2018, our radio stuff, our direct mailers of all things. Some dentists are just like, oh, what a joke. And I'm just like, I've tried it before and it was a joke because that was marketing guides, but you do data-driven decision-making.
Well, and part of it is, I'm glad you brought up direct mail, because when the strategists and the powers that be, when it comes up on the list, every part of me cringes so hard, because in my house, I can't throw direct mail away fast enough. And most of the people, if I were to ask them the same, they say the same thing. Right. So when it comes up, and it's not inexpensive. And so then all of a sudden when it comes up, I have to put my faith in those numbers. And I trust those numbers and I trust those strategists implicitly. And more often than not, they're right. but it's a difficult pill to swallow. And this is, I use the analogy, not analogy, but kind of the example all the time where I'll have doctors call me up and they'll say, hey, a billboard guy just called me. And they got this great deal on this billboard here in town. And I'll say, well, let's look into it. And we're looking at to see if it's a good investment or not. And we'll call them back and we'll say it is or it isn't. And if it's not, they'll often at the end say, I think I'm just going to give it a try. I think I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And I try to explain to them, that's like me coming into your practice, telling you I have been up all night with an excruciating toothache. You tell me, based on your expertise, that I need a root canal. And I look back up at you and say, now let's do braces. And you would say, well, what? Braces won't, but that's not going to fix your problem. Exactly. Right?
Chris, it reminds me, just with the kids last night, I was watching Mr. Bean, the movie, and I don't know if it's early 90s or late 80s kind of stuff.
Classic.
And he sits down at the dentist and he counts over on the x-ray and he goes, because the dentist had fallen over after numbing his leg and he fell over and he's counting over 3, 4, 5 teeth. So he picks up the drill and he's like, this seems easy enough. And he starts drilling on it. Then he realizes, wait a second, I think the x-ray can flip over. And then he kind of shrugs his shoulder and he goes, well, maybe I should count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. He starts drilling on that tooth. Then he goes, oh no, it looks like the x-rays can flip upside down, not just left to right. So then he starts going, maybe I'll just drill in between. So then he just starts bonding his mouth together because he's making the decisions on his own.
I got to watch that stuff again. I used to watch Mr. Bean all the time. It's so good, but it's such a perfect example. And I tell you, one of the things too, where whether it's direct mail, whether it's marketing at all, its frequency is such a huge part of it. One of the best mathematical examples I give is if I walked up to you and I said, I'm going to flip this coin, and if it's tails, you owe me $100. But if it's heads, I'll pay you $200. Would you do it? And most people are naturally risk averse, especially when it comes to loss.
50-50.
So most people will say, I got a 50-50 shot. I'm going to either lose 100 or I'm going to gain 200. And when surveyed, most people say they wouldn't take the bet. And because the downside is so much higher. Now, this is where they're wrong because it's the wrong question. What you should, if you were somebody proposed that offer to you, what you shouldn't say is yes or no. What you should say is, how many times do we flip the coin?
Yes.
Because the way that probability works out, if you were to flip that coin not once, but 100 times in general probability, you'd walk away with about $1,600 with the wins, losses, and the way that it would tend to work out. And that's where folks tend to shy away from doing the things that in the long term benefit their practice, because that potential downside is such a scary concept. I mean, it feels half the time no better than just throwing it down on the slot machine. And it's funny where our brains are wired so strangely, where certain things seem like good risks and certain things seem like bad risks. The lottery is such a great example, where folks sometimes, when it gets really high and they'll play it, just for fun. They'll say, I'll do it because I'll pay $1 and I'll get at least $1 worth of daydreaming about what it would be like to win $300 million or whatever. And I've got no problem with that. But when it comes to folks who they want to believe, they're like, well, somebody has to win, and maybe it's me. I'd say, well, if you truly believe that, let me have you do this. Would you ever play the lottery numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Powerball 6? I go, would you ever do that? And they would say, no, that's stupid. That combination seems wildly unlikely. But it is no less unlikely than any other random combination of numbers that's there. But our brain says the random numbers that either the computer generates or we pick, that's somehow better than sequential numbers.
Isn't that interesting? Because I totally agree. Yeah, you like when you think rationally, you go, well, of course it's the same, but if you said, okay, well then go put your dollar down on it, I'd be like, well, okay, give me 12 and 24 and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like somehow that seems better. And that's why it's funny when it just comes to this overall decision making and what you're basing it on, when you just reframe it using the same probabilities and the same data just presented in a different way, all of a sudden what's silly becomes very clear. And what's smart becomes clearer. And if there is a downside, at least you're able to calculate it and know what it is. So again, going on and on here, but for folks who are out there listening and you want us to take a look at your practice and your numbers, I love doing it and I love what we uncover. And I just love hearing people's voice when they're like, I knew it. Like I knew it wasn't right. Like I knew something was going on.
You've seen me go through that aha time and time again over the last 4 years.
Oh, if you want to buy good sleep, that's where it is. And even if the problem's not fixed, sometimes just knowing where it is and the scope of it that's the power unto itself.
Well, Chris, I'll just be forthright with the audience here is, I'm spending probably $10,000 a month on marketing, and there's no way that I would have done that 5 years ago. I was spending $0. Now I'm spending $10,000 a month, but I'm getting consistently, a $30,000, a $50,000 of production return on in that investment. So, but I didn't just jump there, and it almost sounds ridiculous. It's just like, Chad, why don't you just pocket that? And because I know that consistency is the key, and I've now proven it to myself. And at first, I was skeptical. Now, if people do want to get a hold of you, talk this stuff over, it's chris@productivedentist.com.
You got it. Or go on our website, sign up for an assessment where we'll send you, which is called a rapid assessment intake. Just gives me a brief 30,000-foot view of your practice, kind of where you see some of the potential to be. Because again, one of the things I'm very interested in is the perception of your practice versus the reality. Oh, no, that's all I was going to say. It's just very interesting that people could say, oh my gosh, I thought that hygiene was really just a black hole in my practice, when in reality it's anywhere but. Yes. And so on. And it's that's what we really want to know.
Well, and when I first got a hold of you via email, and then we had our call, I refer a lot of people to you to have that conversation, because I tell them, and I'm telling the audience right now, Chris is a genuinely great guy. He is going to look over your data and not waste your time with because he's also trying to figure out, is he able to help you? And are you wanting and willing and to make the changes that you need to get done what you need to? But it's not a high pressure sales pitch. If you just told him, I'm going to think about it, he's going to leave you alone. He's going to let you think it over, and the ball's in your court. So I'm just telling you that so that way you don't feel like you're just going to be run roughshod, but you've got him in your corner when you're ready. And he just kind of wants to make that contact. It was awesome. And I had a very high hesitancy towards consulting or anything like that until I gave Chris a call, and he was no pressure, but I kept on, approaching him more and more about what Productive Dentist Academy could offer for my office and myself and my family and my community and my patients, and it's made a vast difference. So, Chris, I guess just publicly, I want to say thank you, and thank you also in advance for not being high pressure for the people that do contact you, because people are scared. You know that. You talk about how people call you from the parking lot and they're upset.
Well, they're terrified, and it's and I'll tell one last story since we're kind of on the topic. There's too many folks out there who kind of take the write me a check and trust me method, and they run you down, and what you need to do is sign up. How's it work? Easy as pie is how it works. Well, I have a fundamental philosophy that I don't pick fights I can't win, because the office they're in no better shape. Our reputation's in no better shape, and I got better things to do with my time. But this guy calls me, it's 1 month ago, and he'd been an associate in a practice for 3 months. The owners of the practice were not dentists. They were actually lab technicians who had built essentially a dental practice around their lab and just hired associates over time to come in. He was young, he was eager, he was ambitious, and he got hosed. This was almost exclusively Medicaid practice, everything outdated, paper charts, everything's old. The owners hosed him and just bailed. And all of a sudden, the reality of it setting in, he lives an hour and 20 minutes from this practice, a wife and a child that he would love to take care of. And he calls me up, and he's scared to death. But here's the problem. He doesn't have two nickels to rub together, right?
Yep.
So what's this guy gonna do? So knowing the reality of his situation, I think I remember this because I was supposed to go on a date with my wife, and I was late because in front of me it was not my job to say, oh, no business here, cut and run. Sorry, kid, good luck. It wasn't about that. And it's the same thing with most dentists. I'm less concerned with who you are today as much as I'm concerned with who you're trying to be, and does it sound to me in your voice that you're capable of doing what it takes to get there. So I think I spent maybe an hour and a half on the phone with this guy just saying, here's what you can do now. And so I gave him some tips and some tactics and different things, and I posed some hard questions to him. And all of a sudden, literally yesterday, he pops up on my calendar. And I was like, interesting. It was 3:00 yesterday. I get on the call with them, looking forward to getting this update. And I can tell you what, in his voice, he was a new man. All of a sudden he says, okay, you told me to do these things. I started to do these things. And he goes, and it's working. It's working. He can feel the ground under his feet becoming more solid. And he said, you put some really hard questions to me. And he goes, and I didn't have the answers. He goes, I have the answers now. I know exactly this is going to happen. And all this now does his cash flow still support full coaching right now? Not necessarily, but he's closer now to where he has some cash that we can allocate towards some other development elements that he can ultimately use to improve this practice or flip it or whatever he wants to do. And I go, and that's how I want to be known. Because there's too many people that they just won't help you. And I'm like, and it's just not okay that.
And that's what I was afraid of. Give you the $30,000. We'll tell you to raise your fees and you're welcome. See you later. And there's no skin in the game as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it was, and it was wonderful to hear. And of course that's why we do it. And because there's, better than, I ever will, the pressures of being a small business owner, right? And it's in the reality, not to go on a political rant, but the nature of our country depends on these organizations doing really well. They provide jobs, they pay taxes, and it's hard enough, just to do it when it's working well. Okay. That when it's stressful, it is so difficult and stuff. So any way that we can get closer to making sure that the folks who have taken these risks and hire people and do all these great things, like they deserve to have thriving businesses. They absolutely do.
That's Chris, that's quite a kumbaya moment, because the truth is, whatever political side you're on, people want to see small businesses do well. I really, I would hope so. Of course there's those outliers where that word comes up again, but by and large, that should be something that we agree upon, is that we certainly want our local businesses to be thriving and doing well. And boy, if someone had contention with that, I wouldn't put them in one political party or the other. I would just say you're just being difficult.
I would say so too.
Yeah.
So I thank you, Chad, for chatting with me today. And folks, like I said, I worry more about the people who don't call.
Chris, so you leave us with wanting more, and I really appreciate you giving us as much as we did. I imagine this might just be a 2-episode kind of thing that we'll need to split up, so that way people that are waxing up their dentures in dental school can listen to, or certain dentists across the nation that are driving home. But you gave us a lot to think about. Also, keep in mind, people, Chris speaks at every Productive Dentist Academy workshop, which are 3 times a year. A lot of times they're February, May, and October. And so if you're interested, check out productivedentist.com. And this is Everyday Practices. Thanks for joining.
Bring your lunch or take us to the gym again next week to improve your everyday practices. Also, subscribe on iTunes, follow us on social media, and sign up for our email list. Now get out there and win with Everyday Practices.